Welcome back to Talking to Myself. I'm Carol L. Paur, author and your host. We have a super special guest, so we're going to get right into this show. Christa Heschke is a literary agent for McIntosh and Otis out of New York City. However, she has some Wisconsin roots. She received her bachelor's from New York Binghamton University and did some interning at Writer's House and Sterling Lord Literaristic. She joined McIntosh and Otis in 2009. So Christa, to me, there's a bit of a mystique around the idea of a literary agent. Among some of my fellow authors, when we hear someone has landed an agent, we're all in awe. But I don't fully understand the world of literary agents. Could you explain what an agent is and what an agent does?
To put it simply, a literary agent is an author's representative or the middle person between a publisher and the author. We wear many hats, and every agent may differ as far as what they do and don't do. For instance, some agents are very editorial and provide in-depth notes on manuscripts, while others may not be as hands-on editorially. So it's necessary as an author to think about what is really important to you in an agent when you're sending out queries. In general, agents will work really closely with their clients on their manuscripts, create submission lists, and send the manuscripts to editors at different publishing houses. So it's really our job as agents to network and get to know different editors at a variety of imprints at different publishing houses, from the big five to indies, and to submit projects to them that fit their wish list. So we really want to give our clients the best shot at finding the right publishing home and editor fit. Thus, making these connections really is key. We also play the role of professional pests, as I like to say. So after we send a submission, we'll send check-in emails on occasion to make sure the project stays on the editor's radar until they respond. And once an offer comes in on a submission, we would negotiate it on the author's behalf. So when the deal terms are finalized and a contract is then sent, we'd also negotiate that. Agents often have established boilerplates with publishers, meaning there's language you've agreed to and previously negotiated that becomes a part of our contracts that is favorable to the author. It's also our job to protect our clients and make sure they get the best contracts and terms. So we're also here to explain the legalese so authors understand their contracts. But our job doesn't stop after a contract is signed. We still would remain the go-between for the author and publisher throughout the process, from editorial to copy editing, cover consultation, marketing and publicity, etc. So from there, as an agent, I would then focus on career building. So I look to work with my clients from book to book and beyond. So it's important to me that I understand each author's career goals, whether it's writing a book a year, making a bestseller list, branching into different genres and age groups, what have you. And I do what I can to make all of this a reality. I also help my clients with promotion and publicity and making sure we're working the best we can with the publisher's team to promote the book.
That's a pretty extensive job description. There are probably things agents don't do. Could you tell us what those are?
An agent doesn't charge reading or editorial fees to potential clients or current clients. We work on commission and get paid once we sell a project. So if an agent is trying to charge you fees up front, that is a huge red flag. Not all agents handle subsidiary rights such as translation, film, TV, and audio. They may either grant those rights to the publisher or work with co-agents. At McIntosh and Otis, we personally handle all subrights for our clients, either in-house or through our co-agents. Also, an agent doesn't publish the books themselves. Rather, we submit them to editors we think could potentially buy and publish them.
I read somewhere that you receive at least 100 queries a week. How can an author stand out with all that competition?
There are definitely ways that an author might capture my attention through their queries. I would say that doing your research is definitely one important piece. It's important as an author to research what agent you're submitting to is looking for and what type of agent there are, more hands-on or hands-off, experienced or newer, editorial or not editorial. The former is important, as sending a submission in a genre or age range the agent doesn't represent is typically an automatic rejection. The latter is important, however, as you envision your career, where you want to go, and what type of agent may be the best fit for you and what's important to you. It's also helpful to let agents know the genre and age range of your book up front. For agents who accept queries by email, it's always a good idea to include the title and age range of your project in the subject line so that agent can get a sense of what they'll be looking at. I don't personally accept email queries, though. I use Query Manager now, which is a service to receive queries that's more organized for agents and more accessible for writers. And I really think Query Manager is great because it labels submissions by genre and age category. So I like when writers get very specific with the information they put in. For instance, instead of just children's, a writer could input middle grade or even middle grade fantasy. So that way, if I'm eagerly looking for, say, middle grade fantasy, I can look at queries that fit that mold first. Though we do read and respond to all queries, just to be clear. The query letter itself is also important, so know your hook and what makes your story stand out. Know your comps and try to use ones from the last few years. So comps are published titles or sometimes TV shows or movies that could be similar in some way to your book. For example, you could say my story is X book meets Y book, or my story has the feel of Z movie. Of course, you don't want your project to feel too similar to something that's already out there, so it should still feel different and unique. Many agents include favorite books and media on their websites or include them on MSWLs, which are manuscript wish lists, on Twitter, etc. So when I see my favorites mentioned in a query, my interest is often grabbed. Knowing the current market is also important. If you're submitting a genre that agents and editors aren't really looking for at the moment, it may be a lot harder for you to get requests. The most important part to me, though, is the sample pages themselves. So if it's voicey and draws me in, I'll want to request more pages and read on. I'm always looking for fully fleshed out characters that jump off the page, and a good voice can really draw me to genres I might not typically look for. It's really so important, but can't exactly be taught. Every author is going to have their own distinct writing voice, but knowing your character's story and world inside out can definitely help your voice soar.
I don't like to be negative, but what are some things authors do that get an automatic no?
Make sure that you personalize your queries to each agent, so don't copy every agent you want to query in one email. Make sure to address one email per agent and use their name, not dear sir or madam. And read each agent's wish list and make sure you're sending a project in a genre and age range there is represent. So for instance, if you send me an adult nonfiction, for example, it's an automatic no, as I don't represent that. Also, be considerate. You might be surprised how many queries I've gotten over the years that were rude and demanding. Also, follow each agent's submission guidelines. When authors don't do this, it's often an automatic no. For example, if they send to my regular email instead of my Query Manager page, I'll often delete the query unread.
So, Christa, let me paraphrase a little bit. So you're saying, be polite, follow the agent's submission guidelines. So in your case, they should use Query Manager, not your email. Know what the agent is looking for. Do not send a horror adult query letter to an agent who only deals with picture books, right? So, Christa, where do you go about finding an agent?
There really are a lot of great online resources to research agents and determine if they're reputable or not. Many agents are members of the AALA and must uphold their canon of ethics, though that's not to say that agents who aren't members aren't reputable. You can also find directories through SCBWI and Query Tracker. For established agents, you can check their publisher's marketplace page for recent deals. For newer agents, if they're working under established agent, they're often getting important mentorship. I was lucky enough to have a great mentor as an assistant that led me to understand how to be an agent and the ins and outs of the industry. You can also look into the agency itself and their sales track. Author groups, whether through Twitter or elsewhere, can also be really good resources as well.
What are some agent no-nos that authors should pay attention to?
As mentioned above, agents who charge reading fees or editorial fees should be avoided. To be clear, many agents attend writers' conferences and may do paid critiques for different writers' organizations. This is totally acceptable. Watch Twitter. When an agent has questionable behavior, it's often called out there, though not always. Agents who are unresponsive and not transparent with their clients raise red flags as well. Another red flag would be if an agent says they would own your work, whether they submit it or not, or can do whatever they want with it, submit without your knowledge, not pay you properly. Luckily, though, most agents are reputable and are truly looking out for their clients' best interests.
So could you tell us a little bit about your work with McIntosh and Otis?
As McIntosh and Otis is an older agency, we've been around since 1928, which is awesome. Our agents also work with authors' estates and other long-term agency clients. So when I started agenting, I started representing all the children's estates on top of my own client list, which I've built over the years. So all in all, I have around 40 clients. For estates, it's typically handling the occasional reprint or subrights deal and not as intensive as what I do for my front list clients. So at this point, I don't take on as many clients as I did when I started, but I'm always looking for the next project that excites me. Making sure that I have enough time and energy to devote to each and every client is really important to me. So if I ever got to the point where I felt I couldn't do that, I might take a pause on taking on new clients. Luckily, I have a great support system with my assistant and junior agent, Danielle Hunter, who just started taking on her own list.
At the beginning of the show, I talked about the awe in landing an agent. So once an author signs on the dotted line, tell us what a good relationship between an agent and author looks like.
For me, communication is one of the most important things for a successful author-agent relationship. So I try and make it clear to my clients from the get-go that I want them to feel comfortable reaching out to me whenever they have a question or concern. The last thing I'd want is a client to suffer in silence because they're afraid to approach me with an issue. As an agent, I really want my clients to feel happy and taken care of and as involved as they'd like through every step of the process. I think it's also key to be able to take editorial feedback constructively. It can be hard sometimes to get feedback, pointing out potential areas to fix. You get so close to the projects you write. I understand that. And my editorial feedback is never mandatory. It's just suggestions to get the wheels turning and never meant to hurt my clients, of course. So even the best authors might need a lot of revision. Sometimes authors will come up with an amazing new direction to tackle an issue I may not have thought of. But not being interested in editing a manuscript to make it the best it can be for submissions may make it harder to sell. So I really think this is an important part of the process.
Does the manuscript need to be finished before someone queries you? Are there any exceptions?
Yes, I definitely think that a manuscript needs to be finished before it's sent to an agent. I would always like to see the full manuscript before making a decision on a potential new client. If a work is interesting to me but unfinished, I'd ask the author to resend their query when it's done. Graphic novels and some nonfiction can be the exception here, as those often will sell on proposal to publishers. I'd also suggest getting a critique group and other eyes on the manuscript so you can edit and make it as strong as you can before sending to agents. Because if the manuscript is not polished or riddled with mistakes, it's typically an easy no. This, of course, is not to say it needs to be perfect and submission ready, as most agents will work with you further on editorial.
Tell us a little about your journey into becoming an agent.
I actually quite randomly fell into becoming a literary agent. I was an English major in college, but I didn't specifically want to teach. And one of my friends had interned at Writer's House in New York and suggested I apply for an internship. So I did that internship. I fell in love with the agency side of publishing, which I honestly hadn't known much about before applying. And from there, I did another internship, and when I graduated, I applied to editorial and agenting jobs, because at that time I wasn't quite sure, where I wanted to be. I was also interested in the editorial side. When I interviewed at McIntosh Otis, I really connected with the children's department agent at the time. I was also a fan of some of their titles. So when they offered me the assistant job, I was excited to take it. And I really never looked back from there and truly fell in love with the kids side of publishing. So when the time came and I was able to take on my own list, I knew it was the right step for me. I have branched out into adult a bit though more recently, specifically in rom-com, fantasy, and horror, but the children's side of publishing will definitely always be a passion for me.
So you're out there helping writers to get their work out into the world. What about you? Have you ever wanted to be an author?
I've dabbled with writing since I was a kid. At my school, in elementary school, we actually had, we called it the Panther Press, and we would write short little stories and illustrate them ourselves, which was really fun. But I've never actually finished a novel. I've come up with ideas and written bits and pieces, but it hasn't gone past that. Someday I would definitely love to take the time to write something in full, even if it's just for me. But just even dabbling gives me all the more respect for writers, because just finishing writing a book is really a huge accomplishment.
Thank you for that, because I know a lot of writers out there who have finished manuscripts but feel discouraged. So, I think you all should feel proud of your accomplishments. Even if you just have one draft or your first draft done, you finished a book. All right, let's get back. Christa, you have given us lots of great information, but I have a few more questions. You are an agent who specializes in kidlit, even though you said you are moving into some adult fiction. What advice would you give someone wanting to write for kids?
If you're a children's author, I would suggest looking into SCBWI, which I mentioned earlier on in the podcast, which is the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. There are chapters in most states. A lot of states even have multiple chapters, and they can help pair you with critique partners, provide writers' retreats, and they have many great events, including conferences where agents and editors may present. I've done a fair amount of them over the year, and they've always been a great experience. They're a great place to learn and network. There are other writers groups too, so see what your local area may offer writers. Also, always be reading current books in the genre and age range you write for. It's important to get a sense of the market, what's selling and working, and to determine how your book stands out and would fit on the shelf.
I'll be honest with you, I have a lot of stuff, and the temptation for me is just to send it all, right? I want to say, okay, I got this picture book or this young adult novel or this middle grade. But I've heard that agents want one submission at a time. Is that true?
Yes, 100%. But please only send me one project at a time. As a writer, you grow with each project you write, so it's not unusual to query a few projects before finding an agent. So yes, please do send me future projects if I say no to an earlier one. And if I'm especially interested in a writer, but their current project might not quite be there or right for me at the time, I will often let them know that I'd like to see more from them.
As I mentioned before, you do have some Wisconsin roots. Do you ever get back to the cheesehead state?
I do get back to Wisconsin. I try to go back once a year. I grew up in Western New York State, actually, but as I have family in Wisconsin, both my parents were born and raised there. We'd often visit a few times a year as I was growing up. Unfortunately, I'm not able to go quite as often now, and my family's more spread out across the country, but my grandfather is still there, some aunts, uncles, and cousins, and we also have family reunions every other year on my dad's side, and I usually go to them, so it's always nice to go back for sure.
Maybe this is a personal question, but are you a Packer fan?
Yes, I am a Packers fan. I'm definitely a very vocal and loyal Packers fan. My dad has always been a passionate fan, and a lot of my family, so I grew up watching them, and I'm still an active fan as an adult. I can't even tell you how many Packer shirts I have at this point. And just ask my husband, I always have the game on when they play. He's an Eagles fan, but luckily they don't play each other too often.
Christa, I have enjoyed our conversation. Do you have any other comments or thoughts?
I'd say write because you love to write. Try not to put too much pressure on yourself. It often takes time to break into publishing, and every author has their own experience. Some writers get an agent with their first book, but many others have queried multiple projects. So I would say don't give up, and remember that your journey is yours alone. So don't feel you need to be on the same career trajectory as someone else. Know when to put a project aside if it's not working and start on the next one. That's how you grow as a writer, by writing more. And find a support system. Critique groups are truly invaluable, not only to strengthen your craft, but to be able to talk and learn from other writers who write in your genre, who may be at different stages in the process, from an agented to published.
That wraps up episode 25. Thank you for listening. I'll be at the Barnes & Noble in Wausau this Saturday, April 22nd. Come on out and say hello. On May 13th, I'll be at the Journey Lutheran Church Spring Fling in Onalaska, Wisconsin. Make sure you stop by there too. And please check out this month's blog. See you next month. Cheers.